From revolution to superpower, from 13 colonies to the moon. This is the story of a nation that reshaped the world in just 10 minutes. This is the entire history of the United States. Before America, there were nations. Native American civilizations that thrived across the continent. From the Iroquois Confederacy in the Northeast to the Pueblo peoples in the Southwest, these cultures shaped the land long before Europeans arrived. Then came 1492. Columbus's voyage opened the door for European colonization. The Spanish, French, Dutch, and British all wanted a piece of the New World. By the 1700s, Britain had 13 colonies stretching along the eastern coast of North America. These colonies grew rapidly, but tensions simmered. Taxes, trade restrictions, and lack of representation in British Parliament created growing resentment. The famous cry rang out, "No taxation without representation." In 1775, the American Revolution began. Farmers, merchants, and idealists stood against the British Empire. In 1776, the colonies declared independence. Led by George Washington and inspired by Enlightenment ideas, they fought and won a brutal war. By 1783, the United States of America was born, the world's first modern democracy. The early U.S. faced chaos, debt, rebellion, and political division. But the Constitution of 1787 created a powerful framework for government. George Washington became the first president. The U.S. was still young, weak, and divided, but full of ambition. The 1800s were about growth. The U.S. bought Louisiana from France, doubling in size overnight. Americans pushed westward, believing in manifest destiny, the idea that they were destined to rule the continent. But expansion meant conflict, with Native Americans, Mexico, and even with itself. As the U.S. expanded, so did slavery, especially in the South. The North industrialized, the South held on to plantations. The moral, political, and economic divisions grew deeper. Compromises delayed war, but they couldn't prevent it. As Americans moved west, they clashed with native tribes, annexed Texas, and fought Mexico. Slavery, already a deep wound in the nation, became the most divisive issue. The Missouri Compromise, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, all delayed the inevitable. The 1850s tore America apart. The Fugitive Slave Act, the Dred Scott decision, and the rise of abolitionism ignited the North. Meanwhile, Southern states feared losing their way of life. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected. 1 year later, Civil War. In 1861, the South seceded. The Civil War began. Abraham Lincoln fought to preserve the Union, and in doing so, issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing enslaved people in the Confederacy. The Union versus the Confederacy. Brother versus brother. Over 600,000 Americans died in a brutal fight over slavery and the fate of the Union. Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, turning the war into a fight for freedom. In 1865, the Union triumphed, and Lincoln was assassinated. The South was in ruins. Former slaves gained citizenship and voting rights. But progress faced violent backlash. White supremacist groups like the KKK, black codes, and segregation laws rose quickly. Reconstruction collapsed in 1877, and the promise of equality was delayed once again. In the late 1800s, America became an industrial titan. Railroads, steel, oil, and banking exploded. Immigrants poured in through Ellis Island, chasing the American dream, but often finding poverty, slums, and dangerous factory jobs. The gap between rich and poor widened. Still, the U.S. was becoming a global power. In response to corruption and inequality, reformers fought back. The Progressive Era saw child labor laws, food safety regulations, antitrust legislation, and women's suffrage movements rise. Leaders like Theodore Roosevelt tackled corporate monopolies, while activists like Ida B. Wells and Jane Addams demanded justice and reform. In 1917, the U.S. entered World War I. It tipped the balance in favor of the Allies. The war ended in 1918. President Woodrow Wilson tried to create a League of Nations to prevent future wars, but the U.S. Senate rejected it. America returned to isolationism. For now. The 1920s roared with jazz, consumerism, and innovation. Cities grew, women voted, and the economy boomed. But under the surface, debt piled up. In 1929, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression began, the worst economic collapse in U.S. history. Unemployment soared, banks failed, millions were homeless. President Franklin D. Roosevelt launched the New Deal, creating jobs, social security, and infrastructure. It didn't fully end the Depression, but it gave people hope. It also reshaped the role of government in American life. In 1941, after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. entered World War II. Factories produced weapons at record speed. Troops fought in Europe and the Pacific. The U.S. and Allies defeated Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. But the war ended with a terrible new weapon, the atomic bomb. America emerged as a superpower, and the world was forever changed. The 1950s brought prosperity. Suburbs exploded, highways expanded, and the middle class thrived. Television became the cultural center. Elvis, fast food, and consumerism defined the decade. But beneath the surface, anxiety brewed, especially over race and nuclear war. African Americans led a movement for equality. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and others challenged segregation and discrimination. Peaceful protests and legal victories like Brown versus Board of Education transformed the nation. But the struggle was long and painful, and far from over. The U.S. entered the Vietnam War to stop communism, but it became a quagmire. Thousands died. Americans protested in the streets. The 1960s and 70s were full of tension, civil rights battles, assassinations, and anti-war activism. Faith in government crumbled after Watergate. But culture, music, and freedom movements exploded. For decades, the U.S. and Soviet Union fought a global chess match, the Cold War. There were proxy wars, nuclear threats, and a race to the moon. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. America stood alone as the world's only superpower. The 1990s brought the Internet revolution. Technology connected the world, and the U.S. economy soared. But in 2001, tragedy struck. The September 11 attacks changed everything. America launched a global war on terror, invading Afghanistan and Iraq. Security, surveillance, and foreign policy would never be the same. The 21st century has been turbulent. Economic crashes, political division, pandemics, and protest. But also progress. The election of the first black president, breakthroughs in science, and rising social movements. America remains divided, yet dynamic. Flawed, yet resilient. The story isn't over. From revolution to rockets. From slavery to civil rights. From wilderness to Wall Street. The story of America is one of struggle and reinvention. If you found this story powerful, subscribe to Times Witness. Let us know in the comments, which moment from USA history do you think defined it most? Like, share, and help keep the memory of history alive. Until next time, witness history with us.